Vanakkam. Hello friends. We saw in the previous episode about how the Kalabrahs marched into Tamilagam around 250 Common Era. The powerful Satavahana dynasty in the Deccan had become weaker and several of their feudatories broke away seeking their fortunes elsewhere. The Kalabrahs, who came from the Kannada region of Kalabhras, probably were one of them. The clan that broke into Tamilagam branched out and captured power in different territories, with a major branch ousting the Pandyas from their prestigious capital of Madurai. Another branch captured the famed port city of the Cholas, Kaveri Pumpattinam, while a third branch went into Kanjipuram in the then Tondainadu. For the next 300 years, parts of Tamilagam were under the rule of the Kalabhras, and most of the information about their rule during this period is collected from inscriptional evidence and literary works that came many centuries after their rule. Now, the only inscriptional evidence attested directly to their rule, meaning that it was an inscription executed by a Kalabhra king, were found in a village known as Pulangurichi. Located in the Tirupattur taluk of Sivagangai district, Pulangurichi is a small nondescript village, and a native teacher and freelancing epigraphist, Thiru Karu Rajendran, discovered some inscriptions on a hillock in the regions in the year 1979. The inscriptions showed the evolution of the Tamil script from Tamil Brahmi towards Vatteluthu, and based on the style of the script, the inscriptions were dated to the 5th century Common Era, placing them definitely in the middle of the Kalabhra Rajyam. 3 rock inscriptions were found, one with 22 verses, making it the longest such rock inscription found in Tamilnadu. Though they were in a highly damaged condition, senior archaeologists right from R. Nagasamy to Y. Subburayulu studied them and were able to put together critical information. One of the rock inscriptions revealed the name Kochendan Koothan, Ko meaning king, King Sendan Koothan, while a part of another inscription gave the name Koothan Sendan, who could have probably been his son. Now, all the 3 inscriptions were related to a set of religious shrines erected in the region. The inscription mentioned a chieftain named Yenguman, son of Velmarugan of a Velir clan. It described him as having the title Kadalaha Perum Padai Talaivan, meaning he was the commander-in-chief of an armed force, and he was responsible for supervising the construction of 2 Devakulams and a Kotam. According to senior epigraphist Nadana Kasinathan, a Devakulam denoted a temple dedicated to either Shiva or Vishnu. One Devakulam was erected upon Pachirichal Malai in Velkuru, falling under the ancient Ollayur Kutram. From the lines 8-9 of this inscription, it was very clear that this Pachirichal Malai was today's Pulangurichi. While there is a Shiva temple atop the hillock now, it is a much later structure and definitely not the one mentioned in this 5th century inscription. But what it helps us to conjecture is that the original temple could have been dedicated to Lord Shiva. The second Devakulam is mentioned as located in a place called Viramar, falling under another ancient territory of the Mutturu Kutram, which finds a mention in several Sangam poems about which we have seen in previous episodes. Located around 50 to 60 kilometers away from Pulangurichi, Mutturu Kutram is located near Arantangi in Pudukkottai district. The third structure the inscription talks about is the Vasi Devanar Kottam, abutting a water body named Ulaviyattan in Tabadapalli near Madurai. Now, Madurai goes by its original name Madirai in this inscription, and given that this region was known as a Jain religious center, this Kotam should have been a Jaina temple. Well, none of these 3 structures exist today, and what is interesting is that the inscription mentions a Brahmadeyam containing an Irayili Nilam, meaning land assigned for the maintenance of the temple atop the Pacherichal Malai. Certain land rights were assigned in Pandinadu and Kongunadu, Karan Kilamai, Kalakkilamai, மேலாண்மை உரிமைகளும் காலாசமும் தோட்டங்களும் goes a verse in the inscription. The land and its tillers were to be protected by the Brahmadayamudayar, the person in charge of the land grant. He was to be assisted by sentinels who went by the name Nadu Kappar, Purankapar and Muppuru Kappar. The inscription even prescribes a penalty of 1500 kanam. Now, we have no way of valuing what a kanam is for anyone violating the authority of this land assignee. The very fact that these assigned lands needed protection at that day and age was proof enough that there could have been some sort of communal resistance. The inscription prescribes the names of a few clansmen to preside over the management of the temple and attend to the daily rituals. 4 communities, including Attikoyattar and Ulmanayar, were to attend to the rituals of the shrine. The task of appointing them was assigned to officials who went by the name Pandangar, Sevukar, Brahmacharigal, Tarumigal, Urkaval Kondar, and Narpatine. The word Narpaltine appearing in this inscription was wrongly interpreted by some early scholars as the first inscriptional evidence of the Varnashrama Dharma, the Nalpaltine being denoted as the Andanar, Arasar, Vanigar and Sudirar. However, it is very clear from the context of the inscription that the Nalpaltine referred only to 4 different clansmen. The inscription mentions a Kulaluru Tunjiya Udayar, who must have been a Kalabhra king who died at Kulalur, and it goes on to say how the management of the temple should be with the family of a trustee or a priest who was brought there and appointed by this dead king. The orders in the inscriptions were issued by the king directly to 3 officials who went by the title Ketarulavi Peruntinai. They are mentioned by name Nallan Kilan Einankuman. The other one is a little damaged, Aru Kilan Kirangari, and one Ambar Kiran Kumaram Pondai. The king's orders were recorded on palm leaf by a Vole எழுதுவான் Tamankari Kannan. The content of the palm leaves were then inscribed onto the rocks by one Vennattan Nariyankari. The Pulangurichi inscriptions stand as testimony to the administrative capabilities of the Kalabhra rulers. So many rules and regulations laid down for the administration of 3 small shrines. They must have had a well-regulated administrative mechanism. Starting with the very length of the inscription with 22 verses that some scholars compare to Ashoka's rock edicts, these inscriptions have made scholars re-evaluate the very rule of the Kalabhras. Well, for one, it definitely revealed that the kings were liberal in their outlook and patronized all faiths. They may not have persecuted Vedic Brahmins, as was earlier given to be understood from the information of the Velvikudi copper plates. Dr. Padmavati, retired senior epigraphist with the Tamilnadu Department of Archaeology, in her book Pudiya Nokil Kalabhrar Varalaru, Kalabrahs' rule from a new perspective, published in the year 2023, gives a fresh perspective into the rule of the Kalabhras. Now, we have seen how during the Sangam period, the Movendar ruled with the support of the chieftains who acted as their ministers, their commander-in-chiefs and their advisors. Most of these chieftains belong to the Velir clans. Going by the names mentioned in the Pulangurichi inscriptions, we know that Velir chieftains were assigned by the king for the administrative duties related to the temple. This obviously implies that these chieftains must have supported the king in all areas of administration. these Velir clans were very ancient. So Dr. Padmavati concludes that the Velir chieftains who once owned their allegiance to either a Pandya or a Chola king now owed allegiance to a Kalabhra ruler. Given that the Kalabrahs were not a powerful dynasty like the Pandyas or for that matter the Satavahanas of the Deccan, how did they win the support of the Velirs? Definitely not by defeating and subjugating them in war, but perhaps by aligning with common policies, one of which could have been keeping in check the influence of the Vedic priesthood in the king's court. Dr. Padmavati concludes that the Kalabrahs were able to continue with their rule for a period of 300 years, which is no mean task, only because of the support of the powerful Velir chieftains. She goes one step further and claims that the very entry of the alien Kalabhras into the Tamil country could have been facilitated by disgruntled chieftains who are being persecuted by the Movendar. We have seen how the Great Three were constantly engaged in mindless internecine warfare and how the three of them even came together to defeat the powerful chieftain Velpari, who was loved by the common people and the bards alike. So it seems right to assume that some sort of uprising could have happened and people welcomed an alien power as an alternative to the rule of the Movendar. Now, how critical was the anti-Vedic sentiment in society arising at that time because of the practice of assigning the tillers' lands to the priesthood in the name of Brahmadeyam? There is enough evidence in the inscriptions of the Pandya country to show how there was resistance to Brahmadeyam right up until the 11th century or so. In the previous episode, we saw about Murthy Nayanar, one of the 63 Nayanmars in Sekirar's hagiography, the Periya Puranam. His story revealing a tyrannical Kalabhra ruler in Madurai right about the same time as the Pulangurichi inscription, that is 5th century. Now, long before the advent of the Kalabhras, Jainism and Buddhism flourished in the regions around Madurai. We have seen how the earliest inscriptional evidence at Mangulam, dated to 2nd century BCE, showed the creation of Pallihal, that is the rock beds for Jain monks, followed by literary evidence from works like the Madurai Kanji, where there are lines that indicate how the institutions of learning, the Sale of the Jains and the Buddhists, coexisted peacefully with Vedic ashrams. So what changed during the Kalabhra rule? Were they as tyrannical as is made out to be in the story of Murthy Nayanar? Now, Sekirar's 12th century work, Periya Puranam, which means a big epic, originally known as the Tirthondar Puranam, according to the saint himself, is based on two earlier works, one work being the Tirthondar Tohai, a hymn composed by the 8th century Saivite saint Sundarar, who is also one of the 63 Nayanmars. In this hymn, he enlists the names of 60 saints, and Sekirar takes these names and adds to them the name of Sundarar along with his parents Sadayanar and Isaignaniyar, and brings the count to 63 Nayanmars. So why the number 63? It is very intriguing to note that a 9th century hagiography of Jain Acharyas known as the Trishashti Shalaka Purusha Charita, Deeds of the 63 Illustrious Acharyas, composed by Acharya Jinasena and completed by Gunabhadra, talks of exactly 63 Shalaka Purushas, that is legendary Jain Acharyas, that included the 24 Tirthankaras, all of whom hold a pivotal place in Jain cosmology. Another text that served as a guidance work for Sekirar was the Tirthondar Tiruvandadi, composed in the 10th century by Nambiyandar Nambi. Now, this poet was a contemporary of the great Chola king Rajaraja Chola I, and while Sundarar's work is very cryptic, describing each Nayanmar with just 2 or 3 words in the total of 11 stanzas, Nambiyandar Nambi's work is a bit more elaborate with the lives of the 63 Nayanmars given in 89 stanzas. Sekirar's Tirthondar Puranam was called the Periya Puranam, as it was a massive epic where the stories of the 63 Nayanmars were expanded and retold in over 4,200 verses. Sekirar was the minister of the 12th century Chola king Anabaya Soran, and the story goes that he undertook the assignment of compiling the lives of the 63 Nayanmars at the instance of the king. He is supposed to have toured all parts of Tamilnadu of the 12th century extensively, collecting facts for his work. Given that during that period, inscriptional evidences were very rare, most of the accounts that he collected should have been hearsay. Of course, exemptions are the bardic saints like Thirunyana Sambandar and Thirunavukkarathar, who have left behind copious volumes of religious literature. While the portrayal of the Kalabhras ruler as a tyrannical ruler and persecutor of Saivism in the story of Murthy Nayanar could have been a bit exaggerated, what is interesting is that a Kalabhras ruler himself finds mention as a Nayanmar, and so does a Buddhist monk. This Kalabhras ruler goes by the name Kootrava Nayanar, and Nambiyandar Nambi sings on him thus in his Tirutondar Tiruvandadi. Nathan Tiruvadiye Mudiyaha Kavithu, Nalla Bodham Karuthir Podindamayavadu Kai Koduppa, Vodhan Thaluviya Nyalamellam Oru Kolin Vaithan, Kodai Neduver Kalapalanagiya Kootruvane. So that the Nayanar was a Kalabhras ruler is confirmed by this term Kalapalanagiya Kootruvane. Sundarar, whose work was a guidance work for Nambiyandar Nambi, while mentioning this Kalabhras Nayanmar, sings Aar Konda Vel Kootran Kalandaikon Adiyen. The name Kootruvan as the name of the Kalabhras ruler, as mentioned in the Pulangurichi inscription, is reiterated in both these works with a slight variation. Thus, the Sanskritized Kalabhras becomes Tamilized into Kalappalan. The story of the Kalabhras king Kootruvan happens in the Cholanadu. Now, the story implies that this Kalabhras ruler later embraced Saivism. The story here goes that the Kalabhras ruler assumed the Chola crown and wanted to have his coronation ceremony performed by the high priests of Thillai, that is today's Chidambaram. Known as the Thillaivar Andanargal, these high priests of Chidambaram refused to do the coronation ceremony, claiming that that was an honor reserved only for the rulers of the Chola lineage, who of course were their patron kings and staunch devotees of Lord Shiva. In fact, Sundarar's Tirutondar Togai begins with the line Thillaivar Andanartham Adiyarkum Adiyen, meaning I am the servant of the servants of the Thillaivar Andanargal. Such was their power and prestige. Sekirar in the Periyapuranam goes on to narrate of how this Kootruva Nayanar refused to wear the crown and decided to rule the country by wearing on his head the lotus feet of the Lord symbolically. Sekirar thus christens him as Kootruva Nayanar and goes on to sing of his prowess and strength, of how he had a fourfold army of elephants and chariots and cavalry and infantry, and of how he defeated many an enemy king in the region. Interestingly, the branch of the Kalabhras clan that went into Cholanadu and captured Kaveri Poompattinam were Buddhists, and there are several literary references attesting to this that we shall see in detail later. Well, history shows that in the 5th century Tamil country, Jainism and Buddhism flourished and coexisted peacefully with Saivism and Vaishnavism. The Periyapuranam narrates the story of one of the important 63 Nayanmars, that of Thirunavukkarathar alias Appar, who lived in the 7th century and converted to Jainism. He went to Padaliputra, which was under Pallava rule, and studied Jainism and became such an expert in Jainism philosophy that he was awarded the title Dharmasenar. Well, the story goes on to show how he eventually came back into the Saivite fold. Another interesting story in the hagiography is that of the Buddhist monk Sakya Nayanar. Sakya hailed from the regions of Tondainadu. He is considered a historical figure who belonged to the 6th century Common Era, predating Appar. Sakya Nayanar was born in Tiruchangamangai in the Nagapattinam district. He was a Vellala, a caste of agricultural landowners. He gave up worldly life and became a Buddhist monk. He studied Buddhist philosophy at Kanjipuram and was awarded the title Sakya from the Shakya clan to which the Buddha belonged. The Periya Puranam goes on to narrate that Buddhism did not quench his thirst for knowledge and enlightenment. So, in pursuit of the truth that led to moksha, that is salvation, he embraced Saivism. However, he did not give up the garb of the Buddhist monk and roamed around in saffron robes, claiming that external appearances did not matter for self-realization. Sakya declared that Shiva was the truth that he was seeking and started worshipping the iconic form of the linga. How? Every day before his midday meal, the bhikshus had only one meal a day. He would go to the temple. He would throw a stone at the lingam with great devotion. Sakya's claim being that God will accept any offering as long as it's done with sincere devotion. Sakya continued with this peculiar way of worship and would not have food without throwing a stone at his beloved linga. One day, Sakya forgot his daily stone worship and sat down to partake of food. However, he remembered his daily worship and, unmindful of his hunger, ran to the Shiva temple and threw a pebble at the linga. Pleased with this devotion, Lord Shiva appeared before him, blessed him, and took him to his abode of Kailasa. Interestingly, Tirunavukarasar alludes to Sakya in a hymn where he sings the praise of many Nayanmars before him. And in this hymn, he mentions how it was Lord Shiva who made Sakya worship him by throwing a stone at him before having his kanji, that is porridge. Now, Tirunavukarasar belonged to the 7th century, and it is through this hymn that the dating of Sakya Nayanar is fixed as between 5th and 6th century Common Era. So, Sakya Nayanar lived during the Kalabhras rule in Chola country. Given that Navukarasar lived in a period much closer to the time of Sakya, we could take the account of this story to be somewhat authentic. History shows that Nagapatnam, where Sakya was born, continued to be a stronghold of Buddhism right up until the 16th century. So, if at all he embraced Saivism, what was Sakya trying to convey by his peculiar form of worship? The story could possibly be viewed from another perspective. Maybe it was to drive home a point that the Lord would accept any kind of offering made out of sincere devotion, and one need not waste precious food like rice and milk and honey poured in ablutions over a linga or into a sacrificial homa, as was propagated those days by the Vedic priesthood, especially in a nadu where many people then and now lived in abject poverty and hunger. So, was he questioning and revolting against the rituals popularized by the Vedic priesthood? Food for thought indeed. We shall continue with our exploration of the Kalabrahs role in the next episode with a very interesting case built on the very name of the birthplace of the Sakya, Tiruchangamangai, by Dr. Padmavati. Vanakkam.